Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a pretty seismic shift in global economics. President Trump's just announced widespread global tariffs. He's calling it Liberation Day.
Quite the name.
Yeah, dramatic. And alongside that, we've got the Senate pushing back,
Yep.
specifically on tariffs aimed at Canada.
A bipartisan pushback, which is interesting in itself.
Exactly. We've gathered a really robust set of sources, news articles from all over, MSNBC, Global News, Fox, NPR, Al Jazeera, New York Times, Guardian, CNBC.
South China Morning Post, Financial Times. A lot of perspectives.
Right. So our goal here is to distill the key info about these tariffs, look at the potential ripple effects, and, understand the reactions from experts and world leaders.
Basically, cut through the noise and get to the core of what this means.
Yeah, without getting lost in, dense economic jargon.
What really jumps out at me is just the sheer speed and scope. A universal tariff plus these targeted ones. It's a very aggressive move.
Okay, let's break it down. Liberation Day. Announced Wednesday, April 2nd. Trump declared a minimum 10% tariff on all imports.
All imports, wow. And effective fast.
Super fast, Saturday, April 5th. But then there's more. The reciprocal tariffs kicked in just days later, Wednesday, April 9th.
And these are aimed at specific countries, right?
Yeah.
Based on trade deficits or practices the U.S. sees as unfair.
Exactly. The idea is reciprocity. If they charge us tariffs, we charge them back, maybe even more.
It's using tariffs as leverage, essentially, based on that overall trade picture.
And the rates here are significant. China, already at 20% on many things, gets another 34% slapped on.
So that's 54% total.
54%, yeah.
Yeah.
The EU gets 20%, Japan 24%, India 26%.
Right.
Vietnam gets hit hard with 46%.
Vietnam, 46%. That's huge. What about South Korea, UK?
South Korea 25%. The UK is actually lower at 10%. Other Asian countries like Cambodia, Myanmar get hit too. And Lesotho faces a kind of surprisingly 50% tariff.
50%. Lesotho, that seems high.
It does. Now, Canada and Mexico were exempt from these new baseline and reciprocal tariffs.
Ah, okay. So preserving the North American bloc, sort of?
Sort of. But, and this is important, those existing tariffs on Canada, the ones related to fentanyl and migration concerns, they stay.
Right. Those were separate issues tied to border security and the opioid crisis, not part of this new Liberation Day package.
Exactly.
These varying rates are really telling, aren't they? China, Vietnam, major manufacturing hubs, clearly targeted. The UK's lower rate might signal something about, ongoing talks or closer ties.
And exempting Canada and Mexico seems aimed at keeping those North American supply chains flowing, even with the complication of the existing Canada tariffs. So the justification, Trump called it America's Economic Independence Day. It's about cutting the trade deficit, bringing manufacturing back home.
And making trade reciprocal, ensuring other countries don't charge the U.S. more than the U.S. charges them. Classic protectionist arguments.
Right. He even had this joke with VP J.D. Vance during the announcement. And the slogan they've rolled out is Make America Wealthy Again.
Wealthy, not just great again. Interesting shift. And that focus on trade deficits. Economists are, divided on how much those really matter for overall economic health. Some see it as weakness, others just as a reflection of demand.
Okay, so let's talk potential economic impact. Our sources suggest consumers are likely to feel this. Price hikes expected on, almost everything imported.
Electronics, cars, clothes, furniture, toys, even groceries and home renovation stuff.
Yeah, think about companies like Apple, Nike, Adidas, Wayfair, Acer, Suvi, Austere. They rely heavily on imports.
Apple, especially. One analysis suggested billions in increased costs for them. Billions.
Wow. So businesses facing these higher costs,
Yes.
they either eat it, hurting profits, or they pass it on.
And historically, a lot gets passed on to consumers, right? So your money doesn't go as far.
And the wider economic forecasts, they're looking to big grim. Goldman Sachs is projecting core inflation jumping to maybe 3.5%.
Oof. And slower growth.
Yeah, almost stagnant growth, they said. And they've upped the chance of a recession in the next year to 35%.
35%. That's not insignificant.
Plus, there's the big threat of retaliation, isn't there?
Yeah.
The EU, Canada, Mexico, they're probably not just going to sit back.
That's the major worry. A tit-for-tat tariff war. Remember Smoot-Hawley back in the Depression?
Yeah, not a great precedent.
Exactly. While the world's different now, the principle holds. Trade barriers often lead to more barriers, shrinking global trade, and potentially making downturns worse. And our supply chains today are so complex, disruptions hit hard.
We're already seeing hints of that in shipping, right?
Yeah.
A quick surge before the tariffs hit.
As companies rush to stock up, yeah. But then A sharp drop in new freight orders suggests a lot of uncertainty about what consumers will actually buy later.
Economists generally expect higher prices, and they're skeptical this will be a big revenue generator for the government. Some even worry about job losses in sectors reliant on imports or facing retaliation.
And Goldman Sachs thinks the Fed might have to cut interest rates 3 times this year because of all this potential economic drag.
3 cuts. That really underscores the potential slowdown these tariffs could cause.
Yeah, the Fed stepping in usually means they see trouble ahead.
Okay, let's pivot to the international reaction. How are other countries taking this? Canada's PM Mark Carney says he'll fight them, look for allies.
But the opposition leader, Poilievre, actually supports targeted reciprocal tariffs, so not unified there.
Interesting split. Meanwhile, the EU is planning its response likely by end of April. Retaliation seems possible.
Leaders like Maloney in Italy, Harris in Ireland, Bernlange in the EU Parliament, they're all expressing concern, disappointment.
A coordinated EU response would be a big deal, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. As a major economic bloc, their actions could really pressure the U.S. or maybe force negotiations. Seems like a fairly united front of concern over there.
The UK getting that lower 10% rate seems maybe a bit relieved. Still pushing for a trade deal, though. Starmer and Reynolds mentioned that.
And some conservatives are trying to spin it as a, quote, Brexit dividend.
Australia's PM Albanese called the tariffs totally unwarranted, but no immediate retaliation plans announced.
Vietnam, though, facing 46%. That's going to hurt industries making stuff for Nike, Adidas, big global brands.
Yeah, and we're hearing concerns from Germany, Italy, too. Lots of worry about global trade disruption.
It really shows how tangled these trade relationships are. Some countries might fight back directly, others might try diplomacy. The UK situation shows how existing deals or politics can shape the impact.
Okay, now let's talk about that Senate vote, the one specifically about the Canada tariffs. 51 senators voted to overturn Trump's emergency declaration used for those.
51, that's a majority. And bipartisan.
Yep, 4 Republicans joined the Democrats.
Yeah.
Collins, Murkowski, McConnell, and Rand Paul.
McConnell. Wow, even the former Senate Majority Leader voting against the president on this? That sends a message.
Their arguments were Canada isn't the main fentanyl source, these tariffs hurt U.S. families and businesses, and fundamentally, Congress should control trade policy.
It signals real unease within the U.S. system about these tariffs, especially hitting a close ally like Canada.
Trump says he'll veto it if it ever reaches him.
And its chances in the House.
Probably dead on arrival.
Yeah.
GOP leadership there largely backs Trump's tariffs. The White House criticized the Senate vote, too, saying it undermines border security efforts.
The so symbolic pushback, but limited practical effect on those specific Canada tariffs for now. It really highlights that tension between Congress and the White House on trade.
Which leads to something, well, maybe a bit contradictory. Trump reportedly offered China tariff relief.
Relief after imposing all these new ones.
Yeah, relief in exchange for China's government approving a U.S. purchase of TikTok.
Wait, so link tariffs to TikTok ownership? That seems unrelated to the whole trade deficit argument, doesn't it? Or even fentanyl, which was the initial rationale for some China tariffs.
Exactly. It feels inconsistent.
It suggests tariffs might be seen as, bargaining chips for broader geopolitical goals, not just pure economic tools. Sets a weird precedent, maybe, using trade policy for stuff way outside traditional trade.
And it brings big tech into it. Amazon was mentioned as a potential TikTok buyer. Raises questions about tech power concentration, politically motivated media ownership.
Yeah, that intersection of trade, tech, and politics is huge right now. The TikTok thing really highlights how intertwined it all is.
So zooming out again, the big picture implications. Could this reshape the whole global economic order? Change globalization as we know it?
It's possible. It definitely strains relationships with allies, and it reopens debates about tariffs, are they, for negotiation, revenue, bringing back jobs. What do trade deficits really mean?
Even advertising budgets are apparently being adjusted because of all the uncertainty.
It's a potential departure from decades of increasing trade liberalization. If this protectionist trend continues, it could mean major shifts in supply chains, international cooperation, the whole balance of economic power. The long-term effects could take years to fully play out.
So wrapping up, Trump's Liberation Day tariffs are a massive shift. Huge potential impact on consumers, businesses, global economy.
And that Senate vote on Canada shows there's pushback domestically, even if the administration is pushing forward. It's a complex mix of economics, politics, international relations.
The immediate effects are starting, but the long-term consequences
Yeah,
still unfolding.
definitely.
So a final thought for everyone listening. With these tariffs hitting so fast and the reactions being so strong, what might be the most unexpected ripple effects we see down the line? Think beyond just price hikes. How might businesses pivot? How might countries realign themselves in this new trade environment? Something to mull over.
Good question to ponder.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.